the Robert and Francis Fullerton Museum of Art's Art Hour podcast, the show where we talk about art, history, and everything between. I'm your host, Lana Klaib, and today I am joined by Alison Petty and by Manijeh Badiee, and we are going to talk about art and mental health. So this is a two-part series. This is part one of two, and today we're going to be talking about art and its effects on mental health and why it's beneficial for therapy. So before we get started, thank you both so much for joining me. I'm going to start with some quick introductions so we kind of know who we're talking to. First, we have Alison Petty, as I mentioned. She is the professor here at CSUSB for ceramics. Her work is included in over 50 national and international exhibitions. She works with sculptural projects in porcelain, glass, and rubber for over 15 years and is also the coordinator for grad students. So thank you, Alison. Next, we have Manijeh Badiee. She is an associate professor of psychology as well as a licensed counseling psychologist, and her research focuses on social justice and diversity, specifically with underrepresented groups. So thank you both. So I guess we can just go into the bulk of the conversation. So I think we have, a lot of different backgrounds here to bring to the conversation so we can really get, a fully fleshed discussion talking about all the different perspectives and angles. So I guess we could talk, first, art is known as being soothing and being relaxing. So Alison, as a working artist, you probably have, a really deep understanding of what the artistic process is like and why it can be so soothing. So what do you think it is about art? Is it cathartic? Is it, a way to, release emotions into something else, or it's just the act of, mindlessly doing something with your hands?
Well, it's all of those things and more. And sometimes art can be soothing and sometimes it can be extremely challenging and not always, it's not always, therapeutic, I would say. So it really depends on what one is trying to achieve and accomplish. So where do I begin? I mean, I believe that it's, for me, it's all about flow state. And the more I can live my life in a state of flow where things are just kind of moving and feeling, I feel like this heightened sense of awareness and peace within myself and intuition, the better. So I'm always looking for that at any opportunity I could find. And you can catch flow in a lot of different practices, not just in art making, but certainly anything that kind of requires that kind of kinesthetic intelligence where really the body kind of takes over and the mind has to surrender somewhat, although the mind is still incredibly active while doing this kind of work, but it's a type of surrender for me anyways. So, I think that art can be relaxing, but not always. It can be incredibly difficult. It can be grappling both physically and mentally. I think it sort of depends on the intention of the activity.
Right. And Manijeh, would you, agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on what Alison was saying?
Yeah, definitely agree. And coming from the perspective of, so some of, when I do therapy, I've done therapy with artists, but also therapy with people who are not necessarily artists, but they're like, they could benefit from integrating art into their lives more. And so I think in terms of integrating it into your life, definitely, I think it can. I like what you said, Alison, about it's not necessarily like going to be pleasant emotions, but it could be very emotional either way. But and I think that's part of life, is learning to process our emotions and honoring them. And we don't get a lot of opportunities to do that. A lot of us don't get a lot of opportunities to do that, I would say, to really feel our emotions and to connect with our emotions. And that can be an intense thing. And so I think art allows us to do that and to release emotions, to express them. So that helps us be more aware, and have, I think, a greater range of emotions potentially. So like maybe connecting with like more depths of despair, but also like greater joy as well. Because that's how emotions are. Like we can't selectively numb them. If we're limiting like in one part, then we're also limiting other emotions too. So art helps us like get to like deeper like process. It's one of the things that I think can help. So it just helps with like emotional release. It increases our awareness of ourselves. It can increase our awareness of other people. Like sometimes I have couples clients, for example, doing art together and like maybe creating an image that like maybe like what they want their relationship to look like or what they feel like it looks like, and then they can talk about it and they can increase their awareness of themselves, and also their dynamic and how the other person might see them in ways that they can't do in words. So it can really help people like communicate as well. And some people are just not as verbal, so like it can help. Even though I think talking is very healing, for some people I think art can be such a good like either supplement or either another form of healing where you are like expressing yourself in more nonverbal ways sometimes, although obviously some art, you know, involves words too, but
Right.
it's a different way from just talking. So so yeah, and also it gives you like a good record of something you did at a moment in time for future use. Like there's a piece of art that I have in my office at Cal State where it's like a moment that I was really like devastated and I thought like I had lost hope. And but then by the end of the painting, I kind of have some hope. And then like the next week I got the offer at Cal State. And so it's like such a beautiful, when I see it, I see like sadness and despair, but I also see resilience and like hope as well. And so it's like such a tangible record and I can look and like connect, oh, that's how I felt at that time. And I've had clients use it that way too. Like, oh, this is a record of how I was, either like something rough or something that I overcame, you know, and it's so nice to have that record and like connect with the emotions of that time. So it gives you like a tangible record of how your journey's been. So, and it really also, the final thing, I think there's a freedom that we have in childhood, like when we are creative, that a lot of people like are conditioned out of as we grow older. So I think connecting with art can help people like connect with more of that freedom from childhood as well.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, you know, I think the intuitive piece, you know, it seems like the longer we continue in general education, at least, the more kind of deprogrammed we are from it. And I think that art does engage intuition and helps manifest like self-trust, because, you know, you're kind of declaring stuff, right? Like you're like, well, this is this, you know, and nobody's going to tell me it's right or wrong because I've declared what it is, you know. So I think, you know, there's very few things. Well, when I see students come into our program, they either have always had a strong sense of intuition or they're looking to develop that because they feel like they've never gotten a chance to either see that potential or they need to practice that more. But it's a scary thing for young people to come in and try to be artists, you know, like there's a lot of challenges going on, not just that kind of self-trust part, but I think, you know, society doesn't really see artists as, you know, viable contributors to culture, even though I would argue we're sort of an essential service at this point. Right. to manifest culture, but also, you know, challenge us all. But a lot of students have a hard time even justifying studying art to their families, when in fact it's quite a viable and satisfying career choice. And you know, people, you know, I worry a little bit that we frame it just as therapeutic and not more. You know, sometimes I think that it's a little bit dangerous, or we need to kind of identify all the kind of areas that where art operates and functions, right? Because I think, you know, there's a real kind of trend of, you know, all the adult coloring books and, you know, kind of the self-help industry is really kind of, you know, connected with art as a therapeutic practice. And it certainly is, there's no doubt about it. But then there's also like art for expression, right? And those two things sometimes it's a personal kind of journey and expression. But then when you start to make art for the public realm, I think those become different things.
So just going back to Manijeh, you mentioned that you would use art for couples therapy, and it's interesting because, at least for me, when you think of the cliche stereotype of an artist working, you imagine an artist in the deep corner of a dark studio, just like chipping away at something. So maybe Alison, maybe you can expand on this. Do you think that art is more of a solitary activity that as people imagine, or is it more community based?
Oh, I mean, it definitely can be both. I believe that to be really expressive, you need a little bit of, you need to kind of dig in to yourself. And often it's useful to do that quietly, at first, I think to develop that kind of self-trust as an artist, I think you have to maybe start off in a solitary way. But once you start to trust that kind of inner voice of kind of self-expression, then it can be very exciting to engage and collaborate. So, but I, unless somebody is just kind of born, deeply expressive, I sort of see that people need to cultivate it a little bit quietly first. Also on that note, I really believe in this idea that, to be really good artists, you need, I sort of dismiss the idea that you have to be like a starving artist. That's nobody's at their peak when they're when there's scarcity, right? And it goes, the same thing goes for creativity. Like if you have your basic needs met, then you're able to be fully creative and really engage that side of yourself. But if you are operating from scarcity on many different levels, whether it's like literal or metaphoric, you're doing, then there's something else kind of ruling that expression, right? And it's much harder, and I think it's a little bit of a misunderstanding.
Right. And Manijeh, do you notice a difference between, like, let's say it's someone who's maybe using therapeutic art by themselves versus with a companion, or with someone they can trust? Do you notice any difference in maybe results or how the art is used?
Well, I would say most of the time people are solitary. I think a lot of times that solitude can breed creativity in my experience. That was just an example of how it can be used in a therapeutic context, but I think when it comes to people maybe trying to be more creative, in my experience, but sometimes people like to be kind of engaging in different ways in the creative process together too. So yeah, I guess it really just depends. I think it really just, depends on the person, I guess. Yeah, it really depends. I mean, people can have such different goals, and there's a big difference between like someone who is working on their mental health and integrating art as one of the many tools that we're using in therapy versus someone who is, considering themselves an artist, or like, pursuing that maybe as like professionally or in other ways, So I think there's so many things that might factor into like how someone might integrate art and use art, and like you were saying, Alison, like self-expression, like I think there's so many, like, I think it really just depends, it really just depends on what it means in someone's life, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it goes back to intention, right? What is your intention with the work? Is it to calm and soothe your soul and maybe dig into something in your past that's really troubling? And and sometimes that's a driving force for an artist, like a practicing artist, that certainly can be. But who is it for? Is it for you, or is it for the public? sphere? Those are all really important questions that artists are constantly asking themselves.
Awesome. So Allison did mention earlier that, you're trying to achieve the state of flow. So Manijeh, can you kind of explain what that is? Is it, a real thing? Is it something in psychology? Just kind of what that is.
Yeah, there's fields of psychology that that's talked about, but I think another way to kind of conceptualize it I guess Allison, you can, since you know more about the flow state, like maybe you can confirm or say that this is not the case, but something that has been studied quite a bit in psychology is mindfulness. And mindfulness is essentially like being in the present moment, having a state of non-judgment. So non-judgment means like not seeing things as good or bad, just letting in your experience. So you're in a place of acceptance and you're intentionally doing that. So you're in the present moment. You're also not like worried about the future or the past necessarily in that moment, but just engage, your senses are honed, like you're in tune with what's happening. So that kind of state of present, non-judgmental awareness has been really studied pretty widely, and art is definitely one way to access it. Breathing, sometimes simple like breathing or meditations can also help access it. It's really different for everybody. There's never a one size fits all, but it has a lot of benefits, like in terms of depression, anxiety, to be mindful. And also like relational benefits. It's like in cognitive benefits, even things like focus, attention. So the more we can practice, and it really is a practice, it's not something you're just like, oh, I'm going to do this now and like all will be good. Like it's like an everyday practice. The more those benefits will emerge, and it actually changes how our brain even works, like where our brain processes stress differently over time, because they've done like brain scan studies, for example, on people who've meditated for years, and the way their brains process stress is different. They're not as activated, they don't get as stressed out. It's just those parts of the brain don't light up as much. So so in that sense, like I think art can really help us for a lot of people, just in my experience too, of like doing therapy groups. Also for a lot of people, art can help like be one tool for them to be more present, to be more mindful in their lives. And so yeah, that's my connection to flow. But that, my understanding is that it's kind of similar kind of concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I can give you a great example of that. For me, throwing at the wheel on the potter's wheel, right? So I am fully engaged. My body is like my hands are like the leading kind of force of my entire action. So I have to actually surrender my cerebral mind, like don't overthink, right? Because if I overthink this, I'm going to be like that, I'm going to be self-judging. And so if I just let the action happen and let the body work, is when I get good. I get into the flow of throwing pottery. So, and there's no, and it's super immediate, like there's no judgment or worry about the future or the past. It's full engagement, it's full presence. And it's just such I feel so alive in that moment. And and absolutely completely therapeutic for me. I'm sure my brain scans are looking good after a good day at the wheel. And so, and there's many other practices I could describe as well that have that kind of haptic kind of intelligence that's required. And you just kind of go, and then your mind has to kind of surrender to the body in a way that also allows for really interesting thought processes. Like that sounds a little paradoxical, but like when the body's working, the mind kind of takes the back seat. But then that's an interesting place to be. That is really it's helped me manage anxiety. I've struggled with social anxiety probably most of my life, and the one very safe place for me, or my go-to when things get uncomfortable, or is back to the studio. That's where I go. And I can be anywhere in the world, anything can be happening. And if I'm in the studio, I've created this kind of safe space for myself where I can just make stuff. And it doesn't have to be hard, like groundbreaking stuff. It could just be repetitive stuff, but the making, there's nothing like it for me. It's
So going just back to that, mentioning, the state of flow, what is the artistic process like? Like when you show up to the studio as like sit down, bam, you're in flow, and like maybe like 2 hours later, we're done, we're gonna go about our day. Or is it kind of like, is there this build up, this working to achieving this flow, and is there kind of like this cool down where you have to kind of ease yourself out of it? What is that like?
it can be a little tricky in the beginning. What I've learned over the years is that I never, so I have to kind of shelf my expectations, right? Like I'm very good at technical things. I pride myself on the technical. I've worked years, decades to build up my technical skill set. However, I always know my first day is gonna not be my best, and I always come in rusty because I'm not a consistent. My work pattern is that I kind of go intensely for a while and then I break, and then intense and break. So when I start back up again, I always forgive myself in advance. I know that I will be rusty, and I just give myself permission to be loose and free, and just forget about that self-expectation, and just play, and play is a big theme in my art practice and my teaching practice, and sort of a big part of that mindfulness flow state thing, because if there are no, play is, there's hopefully no consequences, right? Like you can also discover new things if you just play. If there's no expected outcomes all the time, that's when you discover beautiful, happy accidents, right? So I like to just come in slowly and build up that kind of flow state. I have off days where I'm just like, this is just not working, and I have to, and also when I teach throwing specifically, which is a very hard thing to learn how to do, I sometimes tell students like, today is not your day, just let it go, tomorrow will be better, just keep going. You just have to kind of keep that positivity going and build it up. It's like your skills are, art skills are kind of like going to the gym or like developing muscles. You have to like do it over and over again, and you just it doesn't happen like that. So I think patience is key with that, and noticing those kind of high moments or those flow mindful moments, and being like, that's what I want, And just one more thing, sorry to say, that I want to mention is that I look back on some of the work that I've made, and I think about actually how laborious and hard it was, and how I do not want to do that work again. Because just like Manijeh talked about the piece in her office that represented like a set of emotions, I look at that work and thought, God, I labored so much over that piece, and all I can really, when I look at that piece, all I see is the labor and not the flow. And so now I'm sort of like, okay, I'm really interested in the work that comes with ease and grace. And I, that's what I'm interested, that's what I want for my practice. And I want the work to have that feeling as well.
Right. And it kind of goes back to, we said, I think Manijeh mentioned, using that intuition, Alison, you mentioned this kind of feeling of play, just kind of experimenting and exploring, which I think Manijeh mentioned is also very childlike too. We kind of have to work against what we've been taught, as we mature in age, like, oh, adults do this, we don't do this anymore. And it's kind of like reversing that. It's interesting how it all kind of comes together. So Manijeh, I have like a sort of different question for you. Would you say that, in terms of when it comes to like art therapy, for example, are all art forms good for de-stressing, or is there some better than others? Like, oh, like maybe like painting is the best, and maybe woodworking, yeah, I guess you could if you want to, or are they all just kind of equal?
Well, I would say like It just depends, really. I mean, I think any of them can be, you know, for some people, like helpful in their lives, you know, therapeutic. For some people, maybe things could be more stressful. So for example, some people really like doing really intricate kinds of art, you know, like something where they really have so like I'm trying to think of examples. Like, so I've had clients like to like just draw, for example. They just like to draw because they feel like drawing, they're not as constrained, you know, they feel like they can just draw. Versus I have some clients who like to do something where it's a little bit more structured, where they're like, you know, like I have a client who does like stained glass, for example, you know, where it's like that's a very meticulous process from start to finish. And so that's really like kind of focusing on that, and I like that as a goal, but it's a whole process, right? So that's going to take a lot longer to finish. And for one person, that's wonderful, and that gives them a sense of like accomplishment and to do that. And I've had other people that would be super overwhelming to do that, and they prefer to just have something where they can just sit and maybe do something for an hour, and like they've released, you know, they have like released that emotion, or you know, whatever it is, whatever is the case. So I think it really just depends on the person. It depends on their particular abilities as well. Being neurotypical, you know, having different disabilities might play a role. There's cultural things that might play a role that, you know, might make people more drawn to certain kinds of art. Like I'm Iranian American, for example, and like poetry is really big in Iranian culture. So I love poetry. So I happen to that's something that I tend to share with people. I have such an appreciation for other kinds of art as well, but I don't know them as well. So I love when people share those with me. But you know, so things like that, where you know, the cultural things, individual characteristics, like so many things might impact what kinds of art people are drawn to and what their intentions are with that art too. Like whether they are wanting it for therapeutic reasons, or they want it to express themselves, or all the different reasons people could do it. Like I think there's so many different factors that might go into you know, which ones people would benefit from. And it's all about finding what works for you, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's journey. You know, it's your journey. And I think sometimes it's easy to compare ourselves and be like, oh, why can't I do it like this person? Or I wish, you know, like my mom, she makes such like precise things that I could never do with the way that my brain works. But I really appreciate it. But like, I'm not going to shame myself because I can't do that. Like I can appreciate the way that I do something, you know, which is much messier, for example, you know. So like learning to kind of just appreciate what we're doing, and not judging and not like comparing. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's journey.
Right.
I'd be curious to hear, Manijeh, if you have any opinion about like the different personalities and how people might gravitate towards maybe more process-based work. Like you're talking about, so stained glass, for example, very, you know, pragmatic, very measured, very long-winded, right? Versus, you know, drawing can be very free and open and very, you know, quick and spontaneous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice, you know, I also look at some of my students and kind of think about their personality traits and how some people really gravitate towards that really intricate kind of methodical work versus others need to be kind of free and spontaneous. Do you notice that with your clients?
Yeah. Like, are you saying like what are the personality differences?
Yeah, well,
Like,
I'm sort of like introvert versus extrovert, or you know, just I mean, I look at my I have 2 kids, and my son, he's really into like following instructions, for example. And I'm like, oh man, you know, like it's hard to believe he came from me, because I'm like, instructions, forget it, let's break all the rules, you know. But he does all those Lego techniques, and he's following each page, and going back and making sure it's all right. He's like a real engineer mindset, and I'm like completely different.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, you're hitting the nail on the head though. It's that, like, are you drawn to structure, right? So for some people, structure is peaceful and it's comforting. And so
Safe.
people who are drawn to structure really like something that's very intricate, and and sometimes even linear, like there's a linear process to it. And that they still feel some freedom in that, because they're still, you know, able to do so, but they like to have like a structure, versus some people are more like feel more connected to, or more at peace with, or just more drawn to like less structure, right? And actually that tends to give them, you know, more benefits. So I think that's a big thing. I think in terms of extrovert and introvert, I think like anything where someone is drawn to like a performative type of art, if they're drawn to it because of the performative part, I think that's more, maybe more of an extrovert thing, maybe like, especially like I'm thinking musicians who, because that's like a live audience and they're right there. So maybe, but even then, sometimes they're pretty introverted. So I don't know any data on that, but I would think like there's a little bit of a difference versus like for artists, like, and I'm talking about artists now. I would say people who are maybe, you know, wanting to like interact with people a lot more in their art, right? Versus like someone who maybe wants to share it, but they don't necessarily want to connect with people, but they want to share it, you know? So I think it depends on how maybe like they're using it, or like what their goals are. Like, do they, you know, because I think some people really love to, and I'm sure you know this better, I'm sure some people love to connect with people on their art and like talk about it. And like, maybe there's other people that are, you know, maybe like they love all of it, but they don't like to necessarily like do like different appearances and talk about it. That's not something that they enjoy as much about it, you know?
Oh, definitely. I mean, in the visual arts, you know, the tendency is to kind of not hide behind the art, but typically the artwork goes into the gallery, you go to the opening. The artwork is like the face of everything. But then we have performance artists who perform their art, you know, or you know, theater, musicians. You know, I think there's, yeah, I think everybody does it a little bit differently. I've noticed with myself, I really enjoy not like presenting the work, but you know, the work presents itself. You know, I find comfort with that. But then I have friends and colleagues who are performance artists, you know, and will just stage something, stage an intervention in a space, you know, and they're like cutting their clothes off or something like really out there. But yeah, that's never been my personality at all.
Do you feel like those friends are more extroverted in general?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I thought so.
Yes. Yeah, it seems like it. You know, it's just interesting to kind of watch how, and I think it's really important to give that space to people, you know, whether they're, you know, going into therapy or, you know, into art school. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge that people do things differently and give them the opportunity to respond in a way that's really authentic and really who they are, not just like, you know, do the assignment or, you know, uncomfortably. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge those differences and allow people to respond in the way that works for them.
Definitely.
So I'm gonna ask, you know, kind of a new question. You know, we talked about how, you know, there's all sorts of art forms and all of them kind of have their, I don't want to say pros and cons, but you know, differences in, you know, the way they function versus, you know, we said like structured versus more free flowing. So I guess kind of off a tangent on that, it seems like, you know, there's an art form for everyone. That being said, I guess this question might be better suited for Manijeh. Would there ever be an instance, you know, maybe in, you know, the clinical setting or maybe any other setting where you wouldn't recommend someone to try art? Like maybe like, oh, this isn't the thing for you, maybe we should try something else.
Yeah, if they don't want to.
That's a good point.
If after like maybe I explain, because you know, if I'm asking someone to try something, I'm generally gonna explain the rationale why I think it would be helpful for them. So same thing, like if I am explaining like, okay, maybe this particular activity? Like, what do you think of this? Or, you know, and I usually like, we have an open discussion first about ways that they feel would be best for them. You know, if it's writing or, you know, drawing or whatever, like we try to get specific about how they're going to do it, and what is helpful for them specifically. So um, if we, you know, if we have that conversation and they ultimately feel like that's not something they want to do, you know, I'm not going to push them to do it. If I find another way, whatever benefit I thought would come from them, the therapeutic benefit, I'll find another way to do it, you know. But if they're willing to try it, and if I think that there's ways that, and I don't really say I would recommend it to every single person. I mean, it really depends on their goals and what they're struggling with, you know. And sometimes like mindfulness, I pretty consistently try, because that's, you know, across the board, we know that that's helpful, but there's so many ways to access mindfulness. So I help people find what works for them. You know, some people, it could be like taking a walk, for example. So like I do, that's consistent, but art, it depends, you know, because not everybody will connect with it. So then that's okay. So like that would be the main reason. If either one, I didn't feel like necessarily it was consistent with their goals, or if it's just something that they didn't want to try, you know, for whatever reason. So although I have had people not want to try initially, and then they, over time, like I had someone who was in a group and who told me later that like, I didn't like when you had us do art stuff, but then I started to really like it. And now I have the stuff that I made in your therapy group, like up on my, you know, wall where I can see it every day, but I really didn't like it at first. So sometimes people, I guess that was kind of a coincidence, because they had to be in the group, so they had to kind of do it. I didn't know they didn't like it. But I guess what I mean when I'm working with someone individually, like if they said no, I wouldn't do it. But like, you know, this person, I guess, didn't like it, but they kept at it and they ended up liking it. So, you know, it's interesting. Some people, I guess, can, but yeah, I don't push it on anyone. So that would be like the main two reasons that I wouldn't necessarily, either like not beneficial, or just they don't want to do it.
Awesome. And so I guess this question can go for Allison now. What would you say for someone who, you know, kind of wants to get their foot in the door and kind of, you know, expressing arts or like exploring arts, but they're hesitant, like maybe they're like, oh, but I can only draw stick figures, or, you know, starting art is really intimidating. What would you say to them to kind of, you know, encourage them?
Yeah, so I hear this a lot. Oh, I'm not creative. And my answer is everybody's creative. You just have to tap into it. You have to cultivate it. So it's all within you. But it's like I mentioned, it's like working that muscle, growing that kind of skill set. You have to work at it. And so there's also like this misnomer about like artists just being, you know, it's all talent, right? I don't believe that at all. You know, I think people can have inherent like inclinations towards certain things, you know, working 2-dimensionally or 3-dimensionally, ways of seeing things, you know, I think they can kind of have that. But I also think that some students cannot have a natural inclination towards something and become good at something. So it really, I think if a student has, or a person has a desire to make art, the first step is to be vulnerable and be willing to do it, and be willing to you know, screw it all up, because that's how you sort of learn new things, is to make mistakes and to fail, and also see delight in failure. I think that's a big one. And something that is kind of students who come into my classes are like, what are you talking about? Failure? Like I've just spent my whole life learning how not to fail, and now you're asking me to fail, you know? But you know, it sort of defines the difference between somebody who can, say, you know, color in a coloring book versus make a drawing or make a painting, right? From like just from an idea that they've developed in their mind, right? So those are two very different things. And they're both, if coloring in a coloring book is kind of what gets you through the day or helps you feel peace, like that's wonderful. But the kinds of things that I'm focused on tend to be more self-expressive. And so.
So we are very close to wrapping up. So I do have, one kind of, I guess, talking point to kind of go over. And I think, Manijeh, this might be best to start with you. Let's say there is someone who is maybe stressed or depressed, anything like that, and they're not seeing someone for help, psychologist or a counselor or anything like that. Would it be all right for them to say, like, no, I see a lot of people starting art, let me just start it and try and see where it goes? Or do you think that it's best to kind of start this approach with someone's guidance, whether it be, like a trained professional or someone like that?
Oh, I think it depends on their severity of their issues. Like, let's say someone is experiencing a traumatic response to something, or they're severely depressed, or having really high anxiety. Like, no, I don't think that by itself. I think actually that could be harmful, because if they are going deep into the emotions and then not really having any tools, especially if they've never been to therapy or just developed tools in other ways, then you need to have the tools to sort of, I think, explore art therapeutically. To explore anything therapeutically, I feel like you need to have tools for that. It's just like anything else, you're not gonna do something like big, like go on a some like a big trip even, or something, like without having the appropriate equipment and tools, right? So similarly, like if you're using art therapeutically, you have to have the tools to navigate that. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend to use it as a sole form of healing unless someone has really strong coping already. But if somebody has maybe just wants a little bit of stress relief in their life, they don't have major mental health issues, they could start out by, thinking about what they're drawn to, what gives them peace, what did they initially think about when they think about art, and, think about how to connect with that. And, maybe go to virtual events or other events where you can meet people, or just, there's different art groups and such, so you can find community sometimes. So that can help. And I love what Alison said earlier about play, like looking at it as play, because I think a lot of times there's a lot of self-doubt that can creep in, and, just thinking oh, I'm not good at this, or, and sometimes that lack of structure that is in some forms of art can be very anxiety provoking for people who are especially used to structure and want that, so having self-compassion is very important, being kind to yourself, gentle with yourself. It's okay to have those thoughts come in, those, negative self-talk come in. That's normal. That's part of the process. And just breathe through it, soothe yourself, and just have compassion for yourself, as you engage. Because so I would say those would be yeah, but I wouldn't definitely not recommend it as a form of treatment or anything. I would recommend it as one tool of stress relief in someone's life who has, if there's dealing with other stuff, has other, ways that they're developing coping for the other stuff that they're dealing with, if that makes sense.
Yes. Awesome. All right, well, I think we are getting ready to wrap up now. So thank you both so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our discussion. I feel like I learned a lot. I don't know, it feels like, I knew bits and pieces here and there about, art or maybe psychology. It feels like, it's all it all feels interconnected now, I think, for me personally. So thank you both so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our discussion. For those of you who are listening, thank you so much for staying this long. And if you really enjoyed this discussion, please be sure to check out our next part of this series, where we will be talking about kind of the dark side of mental health and arts. So if you're interested in that, please do check that out once it is out. So thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to like this video, subscribe if you are interested, and I hope everyone has a good day. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.